up. That's the 4:40 slot. Everybody's a little tired, but give them a couple minutes to stream in here. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about building a high-performance growth team, and I realize that some of you are really in the pre-scale stage, but I know you all plan to be hugely successful, and it's good to look ahead and to think about what does growth look like as you're really scaling, as you're really building momentum in the business, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So this will complement a lot of what Justin Maris went through a little while ago, and I'll cover a little bit of overlap because there's a couple of prerequisites that you need to have in place to be able to scale growth, but most of it's going to be focused on the team and the process to really scale growth at a high velocity. So a little bit of context on my background. So first 10 years I spent at a couple of companies where I ran marketing from customer zero through NASDAQ filings, and so I was able to really see kind of what's it like in the super early stages, and then ultimately what is it like when you're trying to build something that is much more like long-term scalable and sustainable. And what I realized after the second company is that the most important part was the upfront part, was figuring out who needs the product, why they need it, building an engine to go out and acquire those people, and really, it's something that you do in the first 6 months of the business, maybe the first 12 months, once you have some semblance of a product in the market. And I realized that not just myself, but basically nobody had a lot of experience at that upfront stage, because if you're good at that stage, you have stock options, and then you have a vesting period where you're with the company for the next 4+ years as your stock options vest. And if you're not good at that stage, then you don't get very many chances. So very few people had an opportunity to cycle through and do that a lot of times. And so that was my goal for basically the next 3 years. I went into companies and spent 6 months of just an interim VP marketing, interim growth role where I would come in and set some goals around what we wanted to do over that 6 months and really prepare the company for long-term growth, and had an opportunity to work with some great companies during that period. So Zobni, Dropbox, Eventbrite, Lookout, Socialcast, who sold to VMware, Webs. I started doing a little bit later stage after a while just to see if you could sort of retroactively apply it. And it did make a difference going in and doing it to some later stage companies as well. So now I'm the founder and CEO of Growth Hackers. But what I want to start with is really the framework that I came up with during these interim VP marketing roles. And that framework looks like this. And some of you probably have seen this before, but it's essentially based on product market fit is the foundation of any good company. If you don't have product market fit, you're going to have a hard time sustainably growing that business long term. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on product market fit. Then a stage that is the stacking the odds stage is what I called it. So what I was doing was I was essentially seeking companies that already had signals of product market fit, because as a marketer, there's not a whole lot you can do in that stage other than cost the business money, and it's really what I call kind of pre-product market fit is founder's risk. That's all the risk in the business. It's really hard to get to product market fit. Everything after that is around execution, but product market fit is something that founders get a lot of equity and upside in the business because they're trying to create something from nothing. So I would come in and find a little bit of signal of product market fit and work on stacking the odds, and then was preparing companies to scale growth. And today what I'm doing with growthhackers.com is really specializing in that scale growth stage and building out a tool set to manage the scaling of growth and a community of people who are trying to scale growth. But starting with the product market fit, it's really, regardless of anything else in the business, product market fit determines how much potential there is in scaling the business. If you've got a great product in the right market, you're going to be a lot more successful than if you've got excellent execution on a not so great product or in not so great of a market. So most important factor by far is product market fit. So if you're a marketer, spend time picking right, because picking right is 3/4 of the battle. So what does product market fit actually mean? It means that it's a must-have for hopefully a large addressable market, but you can have product market fit in a smaller market too. It's better to be a must-have in a small market than a nice-to-have in a big market. So it's most important as being a must-have, and hopefully in a fairly large addressable market. And the way that I figure out if a company has product market fit, really the leading indicator for it is asking people who are actively using the product how they would feel if they couldn't use the product anymore. And so if I'm looking for the people who say they would be very disappointed without the product, and if I have 40% or more of the people saying they'd be very disappointed without the product, then I know I have a business that I can grow well. So every business that I listed that has been successful was well north of that 40% of the users saying they'd be very disappointed. So even if overall, when you run that survey, you don't have 40% saying they'd be very disappointed, if you start to segment those results, and so maybe you look at what did just the women say when they answered that question? What did just the students say? What did just the upper management in businesses say? If you run various segments, you just need to have people within that segment above the 40% to know that that's your target segment and that's where you should be focusing. And if you have less than 40% and you don't have it in any segment, you could still be successful. So one of the companies that I worked with when I ran this survey originally, they were at 7%. And so I'd already committed to 6 months, and after that, I started to run the survey before committing. But when I ran the question, that 7% were all using the product in the same way. So they were focused on a specific use case and a specific benefit. And so just by repositioning on that benefit and highlighting that use case and working on the onboarding to get people into that experience, we were able to go from 7% to 40% in the next cohort in 2 weeks. So it's not necessarily requiring a full rebuild of a product. It's about figuring out, is there any value? And if there is, how do I hone in and double down and really focus on that value? I think that's unusual. It's pretty rare that I think you can move it that quickly, but fortunately, there was enough signal within that group that we could really focus on iterating around their feedback. So assuming you have product market fit, then there's a stage that I called stacking the odds for growth, and that's where most of my 6-month period with Dropbox and Eventbrite and in each of these companies was going in and really focusing on stacking the odds and getting them ready for growth. And some of the things that we did during that period was, again, kind of the same thing that I had said about taking a company that was at 7% and moving them to 40%, was about understanding who are the must-have users. And so they give you the signal on being able to fine-tune your onboarding, get your messaging right, everything that you need to do to be able to efficiently start to build a growth engine starts with these guys. So understand the must-have users, who they are, what makes it a must-have, what's the key benefit that they're getting from the product, what were they using before your product, how specifically are they using a product. All that signal coming from those users is going to give you a lot of things to help you start to optimize your value delivery engine around the experience that makes users a must-have. So once you understand that, then you can start to say, okay, this is the experience I need to get them to. If I can build a promise on that experience that sets the right expectations, I'm going to build momentum with the right expectations. And if I can start to understand what's preventing people from getting into that experience, so where are the points of confusion? Where are the maybe incompatibilities with browsers? Where are distractions, whatever it might be? As I understand those things, I can run tests to reduce that friction and get as many people as possible into that core must-have experience. Once you've built that value delivery engine that brings the right people into the right experience on the product, you have a really good opportunity now to grow that business. And so those are really the prerequisites for being able to scale growth, is a must-have product and a really efficient, effective way of getting people to the must-have experience of that must-have product. Scaling growth then comes down to really 2 things. It's team and process. And so a lot of what we'll talk about today is the team and how you structure a team around driving growth, but that team also needs a process to be effective. So starting with team, the growth team is something that has really emerged in kind of the last 6, 7, 8 years across Silicon Valley and is now spreading beyond Silicon Valley. But there's enormous value that's been built in companies who have built growth teams and are executing growth in the right way. And so a lot of what I'm going to recommend today is really modeled around how these companies are approaching growth. And really, if you look at each of the companies listed here, you don't see a whole lot of traditional advertising and marketing coming out of those companies, but they've created billions and billions of dollars of value in a relatively short period of time. So as a result, you have a lot of more traditional tech companies now, IBM, Microsoft, Intuit, a lot of other companies now are starting to say, what are these guys doing differently? How can we emulate some of those things? So I think as early stage companies, you should also be looking at how you are in a lot better position as early stage companies to emulate what they're doing than these big companies who have to change their culture and try to start to approach growth this way. So when Facebook implemented a growth team it was about 2008. So interestingly, both Facebook and LinkedIn started a growth team about the same time, and it was both companies had somebody leave eBay and a process that had been pioneered at eBay and bring them into these companies and built growth teams around that process. And then most of the really successful teams have come off of those two original companies, LinkedIn and Facebook. But what you can see with Facebook is that not only, to me, making a steeper growth trajectory is impressive, but it's not nearly as impressive as maintaining a steep growth trajectory. And Facebook has built a culture of growth and a culture of experimentation. At one point, anyone in the entire company could run experiments in Facebook. They've kind of honed in on that or narrowed that down a bit and gotten more systematic about it. But Facebook really, I think the most successful teams all have DNA that can be traced back to Facebook. And so there's something there. So what does a growth team actually do? Growth teams really, it's all about driving testing. And the reason is that when you start a company, in the beginning, you have no idea how that company is going to grow. I know a lot of people are putting together pitch decks, have a marketing plan section, but it's more like a marketing guess section or a marketing hypothesis. Very few of those things have actually been tested, and very few of those things will work out the way you think they're going to work out. And so the only way to know if something's going to work or not is to actually test it. And the more testing you do, the more discovery you'll do about effective ways to grow the business. And so it's not just testing where marketing traditionally focuses, which is out in the channels, acquisition. More experienced marketers, more progressive marketers are maybe now looking at landing pages as well, a little bit of funnel optimization, but it's still primarily on the customer acquisition side of things. But you really want to run experiments all the way through the funnel. So everything from activation, retention, referral, revenue, resurrecting customers that have kind of dropped out and churned out. So our framework that you're looking at is something that Dave McClure, I think he first started blogging about this maybe in 2007, 2006. But it really captures, I think, the way that marketing has now become much more holistic. And growth hacking is really trying to look at these things. But in the long term, I think growth hacking and marketing are basically going to become the same thing. The objective is growth. And so regardless of what you feel about one term or the other, it's about a process and best practices for achieving the objective, which is growth. And the best way to do that is to experiment across all of these levers. So when you build a growth team, it's a lot easier, again, in an early stage company, but because there's kind of less entrenched people to have to fight against what you're doing. But I think for anybody, it can be a fairly ad hoc process. So in the beginning, what you want is really at the very least, probably a product manager of growth who can kind of coordinate the resources around growth experimentation. And then you can give them access to design and engineering and copywriting and whatever other resources they need to do their job. But over time, if they're trying to do 2 tests per week and they're constantly fighting for a designer, then maybe you want to give them a dedicated designer. If they're constantly fighting for an engineer, then give them a dedicated engineer, dedicated analyst, and over time, you can build a team really around addressing problems rather than going out day one and trying to hire 6 people to manage a growth process when you don't necessarily know which of those people are going to be needed or which things are already covered within your business. Another thing you want to consider is contracting temporary resources around channels that are unproven. So what you don't want to do is go out and hire the world's best SEO expert only to find out that SEO as a channel doesn't work for your business. And so if you can have a temporary SEO person, a contractor come in and help you explore that channel, and then as you start to see signal, then maybe you want to bring in a full-time person. Same thing with Facebook, same thing with kind of a lot of external channels in particular. Now, it's not just a team, and it's not just testing that you need to be successful, and I think Twitter is a good example here. So Twitter started their growth team in 2009, and they got some initial wins, but by 2010, their growth had started to slow down, and at that time, they were running only 1 to 2 tests per month. And so as that growth slowed down, again, more testing equals more discovery. They weren't discovering a whole lot of new ways to grow the business, but in 2011, they brought in a new VP of product, and they started running more tests, and they moved it to 10-plus tests per week. And you can see that their growth rate, particularly in that step there, it's almost going flat. And Twitter went public this year, so obviously they were able to turn around growth and sustain growth for quite a while. But once they went to 10 tests per week, they started to see much more acceleration in their growth. So it's a growth team and a process that supports lots of testing is important. And so I had the same problem with growth hackers. This point right here is about, right here is about the 1-year mark on growth hackers of right after we launched growth hackers. We had pretty good growth for the first year because a lot of it was just hustle based. We were out doing whatever we could to bring people in, but some of that stuff just didn't scale. And after the first year, we hit a wall, and then the next month didn't grow, then the next month didn't grow, and I kept telling the team, we need to do more testing. We need to do more testing, and my VP of product kept saying, we need to do more testing. But in January of this year, we went from we need to do more testing to we need to do 3 tests per week. If we do 3 tests per week, we had a very specific goal to shoot for, and all it took was that very specific goal to shoot for to turn growth around and to get a much more steady upward trend on growth. So I'll give you a couple examples on the types of tests that we ran. So one of these tests, so when you think 3 tests per week, it sounds like, gosh, how could you possibly have the resources to run 3 tests per week? The one that you're looking at here was a 700% increase in emails collected per month, and it took about a half hour to implement. So we basically took the email collector that was at the bottom of the pages on Growth Hackers, that one of our retention tactics for Growth Hackers is send out a weekly email, and the more people that are on that, the more that come to our site each week. And so we moved the box from the bottom of the page to the top of the page using Optimizely, which makes it really easy. And we didn't have a whole lot of expectations on what the results were going to be, but as you can see, the results were great. And so what we did from there is we started saying we need to run a lot more email tests. Like we saw that signal and said, okay, what else can we do? So a couple of the email tests that we ended up running were a step 2 on registration. So the email was really just for this weekly newsletter, but where a lot of the value on Growth Hackers comes from is when people come in and submit growth-related articles and vote up articles and comment on articles. All the community pieces require a full registration on the site. And now that we had so many emails being collected, we figured it was a good prompt to say, you're partway to being fully registered in the full Growth Hackers experience, so let's give them a prompt. So that was an idea that we did. I'll show you the results in a second. And then another was, we haven't really invested. You saw that little email collector. It's pretty ugly. Takes about 5 minutes to create. And so now that we saw signal around that email collector, we thought, let's put a really good designer on there. Let's do some testing around copy and try to get the copy a lot better. And so when we did that. The first one, we saw a 22% boost in signups once we prompted people who had signed up. You can see this. You're one step away from the full Growth Hackers experience. We already had their email. We could fill in their email in the little box. It was very easy then to keep that momentum going toward a full registration. And then the improved design, interestingly, it wasn't about moving it to the top only. We actually saw a 45% increase in signups for the email list when we moved it down to the bottom, but we did it in a way where it was pinned to the bottom. So as you scrolled down the page, it stayed above the fold, but you can see it was much better designed, better copy on it, has some social proof and some other things. And so that's just an example of an initial test that leads to other tests, that leads to more learning, and that's part of the process of being able to grow the business effectively. So the process itself, particularly once you start running 3 tests per week or 10 tests per week, it's really hard to maintain that and not have it just go haywire. And so that's where the process comes in. So the process looks something like this. It's not just this is what our process looks like, but Facebook has a similar looking process. HubSpot has a similar looking process. Anybody who's got a growth team has something that looks like this. And it starts with just generating ideas. And so for us, we're getting ideas not just from the marketing team. So in a lot of the roles that I was in particularly the first couple of companies, most of our growth ideas had to come from me, and that's a lot of pressure. You know, you come up with a few, and not only are you executing day to day, but you're thinking, man, if I get brain freeze and can't come up with more ideas, we're screwed. And so you're constantly racking your brain to come up with more ideas. But the fact is that there's some really good ideas across the team. And even when I was at LogMeIn, our sales team gave me ideas all the time. I just thought they were bad ideas, so I didn't want to test them. But I should have encouraged them to give those ideas and give them feedback on those ideas. And when you start to look at the types of ideas that come from various teams, some really good ones. Like, so from a support team is often going to be much more empathetic with users about some of the experience they have trying to get started with your product. And so they'll come up with some really good empathy-based ideas, where our engineering team is going to come up with ideas that are something that non-engineers might not come up with, because you just don't know the possibilities. So like one of our engineers on Growth Hackers came up with an idea that's using something called O-embed that made it much easier to embed highly engaging content. I couldn't have come up with that idea because I didn't know what O-embed was. And then, sales team might have more insights around intent. What are somebody's expectations before they start using the product? And so the more that you can draw in ideas from everybody, the more that you're going to build a nice big backlog of ideas. You want to get them across the whole R framework, as we talked about, Dave McClure's R framework. And you want to recognize people who are submitting ideas, who are participating in the growth process, and hold people accountable too. If they're not submitting ideas, ask them, why aren't you interested in growth? Particularly if they're on the sales side and you have a lead gen marketing process and the sales team's complaining about not being able to get enough leads, asking them, I'd love to get some ideas of how you think we might be able to reach out and get more users, particularly if you encourage them to ask their customers, how did you find us? What other tools are you using? They can get a lot of insights that can lead to some good ideas. And so drawing them into the process can ultimately be really valuable in building out a big backlog. So, for example, on Growth Hackers, we have over 400 untested ideas in our backlog, and that's awesome to have all those ideas, but it's also becomes pretty challenging then on figuring out which ones you're going to test. And so that's what the next step is, prioritizing the backlog. And so the more that you can actually formalize each idea, initially it maybe is just a sentence that describes it, but the more that you can flesh out that idea so that you're actually thinking through what is the hypothesis of why I think this idea will work, and forcing someone to come up with a hypothesis and not just say, we should do this because I saw XYZ doing it, but we should do this because I think it's going to enhance retention, because of X. Like the more that they can kind of build out those details, the more that you can start to really decide, do you want to test that idea or not? Particularly if you have some research around the idea that shows that it's something that might work. So if it's an A/B test and you're addressing a problem that users in surveys at a high velocity are saying, this is why I'm not signing up for your product. You don't have a money-back guarantee, or I don't understand the security of your product, then that type of evidence can make you want to focus on that idea sooner. And so one of the things that Justin Maris talked about in his presentation was scoring the idea. And so we have a pretty similar process that we use, which is scoring on a scale of 1 to 10. If this works, so impact, confidence, and ease. So we call it an ICE score. So the impact is, if it works, what will be the impact? Is this something that could be game-changing, or is it relatively incremental? So for example, if it's on a page that gets 1% of your traffic going through there, even if it works really well, it's only going to affect 1% of the traffic. But if it's a referral program that, if it works, it could potentially go viral, and each user is going to bring in more than one additional user, that could be game-changing. The likelihood of it working might be pretty low, but it's worth maybe investing a bit more into testing that idea. Confidence is really around the evidence. So do you have a lot of evidence that says that this idea might work? So one, if it's a best practice done by a lot of other companies, I would give it a higher confidence score. If it's a flyer that no one else is doing this, but I think it might work, still worth testing, particularly if it works and the impact will be high, it's relatively easy to try it, then you probably want to give that a test. But confidence, the more evidence that you have, the closer you're going to get to a 10 score on confidence. And then ease. If something takes 10 minutes to implement, then even if the impact's not that high or you're not that confident it'll work, still probably a good chance that it's worth doing, particularly if it's in an area where you've seen some success already. So if you've run a bunch of tests in Twitter and you have a high ease score on something in Twitter, then it's probably worth running another test in Twitter, especially if it's a really easy test. And so what you can see in the line by line is that in an Excel sheet or anything else, it becomes a lot easier to start to compare ideas by really easy Twitter ideas, which one am I going to do? Really easy Facebook ideas, really easy activation ideas if you want to go a little bit broader. So that scoring makes it much easier to kind of apples to apples compare ideas. So once you've prioritized the backlog, then it's about launching the tests. And launching the tests can be pretty challenging, particularly because marketers and growth people tend to be pretty creative, and that as you get creative, when it comes time to actually execute, hard to break out of that creativity kind of mold that you want to just keep brainstorming and keep exploring new things to do. But eventually you have to decide, these are what we're going to do this week, and then you do them. And so for us, a big part of that is a weekly growth meeting where we're driving that tempo and really doing a lot of that planning. Tempo, again, is what identifies the opportunities for growth. As I said, if you run just a couple of tests a month, you're not learning very much about how to grow the business. But if you're running lots of tests, you're learning a lot more. And so the reason I have a Oregon Ducks football team on there is, for anyone who follows American football, Oregon Ducks have this high-tempo offense where they come out on the field and they just start running plays really quickly, and they don't even hold a huddle a lot of times. They've got their plays scripted and they're doing it super quickly. And so in the first 5 or 10 minutes of the game, they've run so many plays that they start to see where the weaknesses in the defense, and they learn the opportunities, and then they exploit the heck out of those weaknesses for the rest of the game. And so there's a reason why they've been one of the best teams in the country for the last several years. So the growth meeting, as I said, is a really important part of hitting that tempo week to week. So as I said, no brainstorming in that meeting. And that's a rule that doesn't seem that important, but you'll find that every growth meeting we have to shut down the brainstorming. Okay, let's explore that offline. Let's not go deep on that. The rest of the week should be around brainstorming. So brainstorming is an important part, but for 1 hour a week, we're deciding which thing we're actually going to do. And so the way we do it on our team is that people on the growth team actually nominate ideas ahead of time, pull together, make sure there's a solid hypothesis, it's well scored, and then they pitch it to the team. And so sometimes what we'll see is multiple people pitching the same idea. That's usually a pretty good signal that that's a good idea to do that week. And then also in the growth meeting is when we're figuring out ideas that we said we were going to do and we didn't do those ideas. Why not? And trying to optimize the process and optimize the resources so that we can actually do more ideas in a week. I included just a little bit on who attends our growth meeting. I won't go through that, but take a quick look at that. So the agenda for our growth meeting is pretty strict. We try to stay on this. The first 15 minutes is trying to look at the big picture of growth and looking at the KPIs. Are we growing at the rate we want to be growing? If not, why not? What do we think the big problems are? What do we, the more data we can bring to the table to really kind of dig into those KPIs and try to understand where the issues and opportunities are, the more that will give us focus in the rest of the meeting to look at what's, the types of tests that are going to be really important to drive growth and address some problems. Reviewing the previous week's testing sprint, as I said, that's a big part of this, is figuring out if a test didn't launch, why didn't it launch? Were we not able to get time with the designer? Was one of the engineers out fighting a bug the whole week? Whatever it might be, was there a project manager that it was assigned to who didn't actually do any of the follow-through? So all of those things, it's not about finger pointing, but it's about figuring out what the issue is so that you, the next week, can address that and start to say, if you're always fighting for a designer, let's go and hire another designer, because this type of testing tends to be a lot cheaper than going out and just randomly spending money on media, but it requires an investment in resources. And so the more that you can understand what's preventing testing, the better. Key lessons learned from the previous week, that's from any tests that were completed in the previous week. That's that our analyst takes us through that. 15 minutes of here's everything that we learned. Not surprisingly, our analyst actually has more ideas than anyone else on the team, because he actually gets to see first what's working and what's not working. And so as he's running that analysis, he's constantly plugging in new ideas into our backlog. And then selecting the tests for this week, that's where I talked about we've already in advance nominated tests, and now people on the team are pitching those tests. And then in the last 5 minutes, we're trying to make sure that the backlog of ideas is growing faster than our ability to run tests. And almost every week, we outpace our ability to run tests on my team by about 300%, and that's the reason why we have 400 plus ideas in our backlog. So, and then setting the weekly test launch goal is really critical to this whole thing. So my recommendation for you guys, again, just want to reemphasize, product market fit first. Do some things to optimize the onboarding of users initially first, so that value creation machine, get that kind of going first. And then when you go out and start running tests, just start with 2 tests per week, and those tests could take a half hour to implement. It doesn't have to be super ambitious. So right-size the tests. If you're not hitting the 2 per week, you're aiming too big on the tests. But over time, if you hit the 2, then get more ambitious and start to think about, how can we do more ambitious tests that are more focused on the things that really matter? And do we have to hire some people? That's okay if you got to hire some people. And then increase the weekly test goal. So move to 2, to 3, to 4, to 5, and then, but just continuing to expand the number of tests that you do is a big part of what the growth team's all about. And then the final step in the process is capturing learning. So as you run these tests, it's really easy then, especially if you're running them at a high velocity, to just kind of lose all of that learning and just kind of have it go out into the ether. And even having a weekly meeting where I've got my analyst who's presenting the data to the rest of the team, what if some of those people leave? What if a new person comes in 5 weeks later? You're going to lose all of that learning. So what you need to do is have a really transparent system for capturing the learning from your testing and making it accessible to everybody on the team. So it's not just sharing your wins, but it's sharing things that didn't work as well, because what you'll find over time, the most discouraging thing to getting ideas from the rest of the team is if somebody gives you 3 different ideas and they keep hearing, we've already done that, we already tried that, you're not going to get a fourth. They're going to give up, and they're not going to try to contribute to the growth process. But if you can have all of your ideas categorized and easy to find, everything that you've already done, they're much more likely to have a good understanding of what's been tried and to want to participate in the process of figuring out new things to do. So the growth silver bullet that I think a lot of people kind of want, that one big growth hack, or what's working for people today, not surprisingly, it's not about a growth hack. It's not about a single thing that's going to work really well. It's about a team that's designed to execute this process. And the more that you have a good team and you're really holding that team accountable for executing this process, the more likely you're going to discover the things that really work effectively to grow the business. One benefit by doing it as a team is that really kind of the key person on the team is the product manager of growth, and that product manager of growth can be relatively easy to hire. That person no longer needs to be super creative, no longer needs to be highly analytical. What they need to be is process-oriented and keeping the wheels on the process. And they can be complemented by a whole team of creative people and analysts and other people. But you no longer have that really hard-to-hire person who you build a dependency on, and then if you lose that person, you're screwed. But instead, it becomes a lot easier to hire and slot people in along the way once you have a good process, and particularly if you've captured all of the learning from your testing so that new people can come in and see what's worked and what hasn't worked. So, to me, the ultimate goal in a company is to create a growth culture. And I talked about Facebook has this growth culture, and I think the growth culture at Facebook has been driven from the CEO. The famous quote of Mark Zuckerberg is, "Move fast and break things." That's an experimental mindset. Facebook's located on Hacker Drive. They have this very nimble, testing-driven culture that I think from day one was pushed from the CEO. I saw the same thing at Dropbox. When I was at Dropbox, there was 8 people at Dropbox, and every day I spent time with Drew, the CEO at Dropbox, just going through the process to drive growth. And after I left, there was about a 10-month period where they didn't have a growth or marketing person there, but they didn't miss a beat. They kept growing at a really good pace, and I kept seeing new experiments through the product. Every time I looked at it, there was some other growth experiment, like copy the link directly to the file, and then when you go in to get that file, you were going to be in a wrapper of Dropbox. Or the referral program actually came from was an idea from an intern, and it was based on best practices of what Zobni did, and Zobni learned it from another company, but ultimately it was championed and pushed through by an intern. So all of those things are a culture of growth, and that's really important. So in a bigger company, you might need some patience to get people on board, but part of the reason why I really liked focusing on early stage companies is that that culture is malleable up front. So take advantage of the fact that you can build a culture of growth and experimentation and data-driven decisions now. Be transparent and share the results, share the process, but be transparent across the full company. And when you do that, you're going to find that everybody's keeping an eye out for growth opportunities. And when that happens, particularly when that happens on top of really strong product market fit, you're in for some really big growth. So that's high level view on how growth works in some of the fastest growing companies, and hopefully as you get to product market fit, you can start to adopt some of these processes and approaches in your business as well. Thank you. So we'll open it up for questions as well.